My husband, James, was urgently transported from his business trip. Receiving the contact, I hurried to the hospital. However,
Don't you think I'm definitely better than a failure of a wife like you, Grace? Who is unattractive and looking older than her age.
this was when I witnessed an unbelievable sight. My sister-in-law and my husband. They were naked, embracing each other. Along with the surprise, a sense of disgust welled up. Because it's just impossible, right? They are real siblings, aren't they? I could hear my sister-in-law's seductive voice, and I inadvertently covered my ears. When I got the call, I have bursted out with a lot of tears from anxiety. About my beloved husband being gone. What was that all for? I want those tears back. No. That's not it, Grace. No matter what he says, I can't forgive him anymore. They betrayed me. I'll never forgive them. In anger, I turned on my smartphone and called someone. To someone whom they will definitely don't want to meet. My name is Grace. I'm a working housewife, turning 35 this year. I've been married to my husband, James, who is 2 years older, for 5 years. James was a senior at the high school where I used to attend. But at that time, we haven't known each other. I found out that we were from the same high school during our first date. Just before I met James, I had broken up with my longtime boyfriend. Believing I needed a new love to forget the old one, I half-heartedly participated in a blind date. That's where I met James. It seemed that James had also just broken up with his girlfriend, and we developed feelings for each other as we comforted each other. It seemed the same for James, so we have arranged a date another day. During that date, we discovered we were from the same high school. As a result of the growing affinity, we began a serious relationship with the future in mind. After a few years of dating, we got married. I think James is a very good man to spend life with as a marriage partner. He is always willing to help housework and never forgets to enjoy events such as birthdays and Christmas. And because James works for a reputable company, there's virtually no overtime or weekend work. Since we don't have children, he loves me with all his heart. I'm truly glad I was able to marry this man. However, while leading a fulfilling married life, there was one thing that worried me a bit. It was about the relationship with my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law is a married woman who is 3 years older than James, living about 10 minutes away from our home. She seems to have adored James since they were young, and when they were in elementary school, they were together all the time. Her affection for James didn't change in junior high and high school, and even as adults, it continues. To her, James must be her adorable little brother forever. And to her, I am the evil woman who stole her cute brother. When I went to meet his family to announce our marriage, she said that directly to me. I want to have a normal relationship with her, not necessarily a friendly one. But that seems to be an unreachable dream. So, at least from my side, I try to avoid contact with her. However, my sister-in-law doesn't care about that, and calls whenever there's a chance, nagging and making sarcastic remarks.
Hello, Grace. Haven't you quit your job yet? Stop thinking about yourself and become a full-time housewife to support James properly. I've told you so many times.
James can take care of himself, even without me supporting him. He's fine.
Don't talk back to me. Besides, I know better than anyone that James can do everything by himself. Just because you're his wife, don't think you can act superior. You're unpleasant.
With everything going like this, I can only smile bitterly and accompany her in conversation until she is satisfied. I have never reported such behavior of my sister-in-law to James, but I have consulted my mother-in-law, who lives a short distance away. Unlike my antagonistic sister-in-law, my mother-in-law treats me very well. We even arranged to have tea together sometimes. After the consultation, my mother-in-law, astounded at my sister-in-law's selfish attitude, firmly cautioned her. Thanks to that, the sarcastic remarks from my sister-in-law have gotten much better than just after the marriage. In any case, I wish she would accept James and me soon. Then, one day happened. That day, I had to work overtime for the first time in a while. I ended up coming home an hour later than usual, but since James was cooking dinner, I decided to go straight home without stopping by the supermarket. I was tired today and thought of going to bed early. As I passed through the ticket gates at the station nearest to my home, I locked eyes with a man. It was my sister-in-law's husband. I instinctively nodded in greeting, and he responded with a hello and a smile. I only see him for a few hours during the Christmas and New Year holidays. But since we were heading in the same direction, we ended up walking home together. Fortunately, he is sociable, so there were no awkward silences along the way. We chatted about harmless topics as we walked down the dark street. After about 15 minutes of walking together from the station, he raised his hand slightly, said, "Well, I'm going this way. Please be careful on your way home," and left. Even though he told me to be careful, my house was right in front of me. It seemed like he had walked with me because he was worried about me walking alone in the dark. I hadn't interacted with him much before, but I realized he was a good person. I watched him walk away before I entered my house. The next day, I had the day off, so I waved goodbye to James as he left for work, and enjoyed a cup of coffee in the living room. Then, the doorbell rang, indicating a visitor. I put my half-finished cup of coffee on the dining table and peered into the intercom monitor. It was my sister-in-law. I wondered if she had come to make sarcastic remarks. Despite feeling fed up, I headed to the front door. I could have ignored her, but if she found out I was pretending to be out, it would become even more troublesome. If I just let her talk, she would eventually leave. The moment I opened the front door, my sister-in-law grabbed my shoulder and raised her voice.
You're having an affair with my husband, aren't you? You're really the worst kind of woman. You're nothing like the quiet person you appear to be.
I was taken aback, unable to comprehend what she was accusing me of for a moment. As I stood dumbfounded, my sister-in-law became more heated.
Why are you looking so surprised? It's disgusting. I know you met with my husband last night.
It was then that I finally understood what she was talking about. She was talking about how I happened to meet her husband last night and walked home with him. Had she been watching us from somewhere? Or maybe her husband had told her himself. Either way, I haven't cheated on anyone. It was a misunderstanding on her part. When I told her this, she snorted in contempt and spat out. "What a shameless woman you are. I'll get you for this," before storming off. Although she didn't seem convinced, I was relieved that she left. I hope this doesn't escalate any further. A few weeks later, James had to go on a business trip. James had been working a lot of overtime and going into the office on his days off recently. It was unusual for him to work overtime or go in on weekends, so when I asked about it, he said he had been preparing for his business trip.
"Well, I'm off. Please take care of the house while I'm away. Don't get lonely and cry because I'm not around,"
James said in a teasing tone and left. Well, I need to do my best at my own job too. I was just entering a busy period, so I had 2 busy days. And then, on the morning of the 3rd day, after James went on his business trip, while I was preparing for work, my phone rang. The screen of my smartphone displayed an unfamiliar phone number. Who could it be this early in the morning? "Hello. May I ask who's calling?" In response to my question, the person on the other end of the line said they were from the municipal hospital. That didn't mean anything to me. It seemed to be a hospital located about an hour away from my house. And I haven't been to a hospital recently. Anyway, I had no idea why they were calling. Are you sure you have the right number? I'm sorry, but I haven't been to your hospital before. Then the other person said, "Is this Grace?" and called my name.
Actually, James has been involved in a traffic accident and was just rushed to our hospital. He is currently sleeping due to the shock of the accident. So we're contacting you on his behalf.
Traffic accident, emergency transportation. Hearing these words, I felt a chill run down my spine. Is James all right?
He seems to be out of danger for now, but we think it's best if he stays in the hospital for 2 to 3 days just to be safe. We'll explain more in detail. Could you come to the hospital?
I replied, "I'll be there right away," confirmed the detailed address of the hospital, and hung up the phone. I then explained the situation to my workplace. My boss was very concerned and kindly said that I could take paid leave for a while. I changed from my work uniform into my casual clothes and decided to head to the hospital. On my way to the nearest station, I noticed something. The address of the hospital and the business trip destination that James had told me about were in completely different prefectures. Was it my misunderstanding, or had James misspoken? I was bothered by it, but I couldn't figure it out with my confused mind. I aimed for the hospital no matter what. About an hour later, I arrived at the hospital where James had been taken. At the reception desk, I checked the room number where James was and hurried to it. I found the room with James's name on it and was about to open the door quickly. But I thought he might still be sleeping, so I opened it quietly. This room was a double room with beds on both sides. The one on the right seemed to be vacant as there was no patient at the moment. And around the bed on the left, a curtain was drawn, making it impossible to see what was going on. James should be behind that curtain. When I entered the room, I heard a strange noise. It was unclear, but it sounded like a voice. I could also hear a creaking noise. It seemed to be coming from the bed where James was supposed to be sleeping. For some reason, I had a bad feeling and slowly approached the bed. I carefully looked at the bed through a gap in the curtain. There, on the bed, were the figures of a completely naked James and a likewise completely naked woman. And what's more, on closer inspection, that woman turned out to be my sister-in-law, which was even more of a shock.
Isn't someone like me better than a failure of a wife like you, Grace?
The moment her sweet voice reached my ears, feelings of surprise and disgust welled up within me. I pressed a hand to my mouth, suppressing the urge to vomit, and rolled out of the room and out to the hallway. I found a bench nearby and sat down, taking deep breaths to calm myself. Then I tried to understand the situation on my own. James had left home 3 days ago, saying he was going on a business trip. But that was a lie. He must have been meeting my sister-in-law under the pretense of a business trip. Then, for some reason, James had a traffic accident this morning. When the hospital called me, they didn't mention my sister-in-law. So I can assume that when the accident occurred, James and my sister-in-law were not together. After that, while I was on my way to the hospital, James must have woken up and contacted my sister-in-law. Then he called her to his hospital room and they engaged in an adulterous act. While all of this is pure speculation, it doesn't seem far from the truth given the circumstances. In any case, the fact that James lied about going on a trip, and the two of them are having a guilty relationship, is certain. I don't know when their relationship started, but it's a tremendous act of betrayal. Maybe they were laughing at me for not noticing their affair. With that thought, I was filled with anger. In my impulse, I returned to the hospital room. I quietly entered the room, making sure not to alert James or my sister-in-law, and took all the clothes and underwear scattered on the floor. Now they have nowhere to run. Then I slipped out of the room again and called my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law responded quickly. Mother-in-law, could you come to the address I'm going to tell you? James has been brought in urgently. I didn't tell her that James and my sister-in-law had been committing infidelity. I thought it would be quicker for her to see it with her own eyes than for me to explain. And so, I waited for about 2 hours. My mother-in-law arrived at the hospital, her face pale with panic. Unaware of her own children's infidelity, my mother-in-law worried about James's condition. I felt sorry for her even though it was not my fault. I tried to calm my mother-in-law down as we made our way toward the room where James and my sister-in-law were. I saw a crowd of hospital patients, visitors, and nurses. I wondered what had happened. Holding my mother-in-law's hand, I squeezed through the crowd down the hallway. Then, a familiar voice rang out.
Where did our clothes go? Give them back.
When I looked at the voice, there was my sister-in-law, covering her naked body with bed sheets. James was doing the same.
I have no idea. Why are you two naked? What on earth were you doing here?
The nurse raised her voice against the two.
What's going on? James was taken away on an emergency, and then...
My mother-in-law, standing a little behind me, murmured in confusion. When they finally noticed our presence, the two of them opened their eyes wide. I have James and your clothes. If you want them back, explain everything. Are you two having an affair? I showed them the clothes and underwear. This seemed to infuriate my sister-in-law, who then approached me, not caring that her sheets were being undone.
How dare you talk back? Yes, that's right. James and I are in love. You're the one who came between us.
As my sister-in-law exclaimed, James nodded deeply behind her.
Moreover, weren't you also having an affair, Grace? I heard from my sister that you were meeting her husband secretly.
James puffed his chest out as if he had one. Looking at him, I felt my love for him completely vanish. He chose to believe my sister-in-law over me. I had no regrets left for him. Just as I was about to counter, my mother-in-law spoke first.
You two, I never thought my children could be so stupid. I'm going to break off our parent-child relationship. Don't ever step foot in my house again. You two can go wherever you want.
An unexpectedly stern and low voice coming from my usually gentle mother-in-law accuses the two of them. Overwhelmed by her fury, or perhaps finally realizing the gravity of their actions, both James and sister-in-law are down, unable to say anything. I tossed their clothes and underwear at them. The sight of them picking up the scattered clothing from the floor was truly ridiculous. James, I never cheated. It's just a misunderstanding on my sister-in-law's part. I can't continue as husband and wife any longer. Be prepared for when you're discharged. I'll be claiming a hefty division of property. And of course, I'll tell your husband. With that declaration, James and my sister-in-law, still wrapped in their sheets, slumped in defeat. After a while, I formally divorced James. After the incident, my mother-in-law and I left them behind and returned home first. Apparently, James, who was supposed to be hospitalized, was severely scolded for significantly disrupting the hospital's order, and my sister-in-law was banned from entering. Then, as I declared, I claimed a division of property from James. Furthermore, once my sister-in-law's husband found out the situation, he also sought a divorce and claimed a consolation fee. Left the two of them struggling with enormous payments, working day and night, toiling away. For a while, James and my sister-in-law, who had both become single, lived together. But due to their strained living conditions, they were constantly arguing and soon separated. Perhaps they were intoxicated by the affair situation. And when that was gone, they might have felt there was no point in being together. After that, James sought to reconcile several times. Naturally, I had no intention of reconciling. The third time he asked for a reconciliation, I warned him that I would call the police. If he continued to pester me, and since then, he hasn't shown up. So I don't know what's happening with James now, but the division of property continues to be paid. So I guess he's managing somehow somewhere. And my sister-in-law, who separated from James, seemed to have been barely making ends meet with day labor. But it seemed like she had reached her limit and finally started working at night. Speaking of which, a few years ago, my sister-in-law said things like, "Women who work at night are pitiful." Now that she has become that pitiful woman, I wonder how she feels. I hope she is reflecting on her actions. As for me, I moved to start a new life. I now live in an apartment near my workplace. I still occasionally contact my mother-in-law. Initially, my mother-in-law was very depressed, but lately, she seems to be slowly recovering, which is a relief. I plan to have a tea party at home this Sunday. I felt as if I couldn't recover for a while after being betrayed by someone I trusted. However, I can't afford to dwell on it forever, considering this is the start of my second life. I'll live positively to seize happiness. That's what I vowed in my heart.